Welcome to Between Two Psychs, a podcast where two psychologists and board approved supervisors deep dive into many of the questions and challenges that provisional psychologists and early career therapists face in everyday practice, during training, throughout the internship, and beyond as they progress into working more independently. Your hosts Isabelle Tombleson and Claire Trevitt talk about a range of topics specifically relating to psychologists and therapists who are just starting out.
We're back.
We are indeed, and today we're going to talk about maintaining our skills and knowledge as therapists.
Yes. Oh, I love this episode. Claire and I, we want to share with everyone the ways that we can maintain our skills, improve our knowledge and our ability as therapists. There are many different ways that we can obtain skill development, knowledge, information, but then also how we record that as continued professional development. Specifically in our logbooks and how we reflect on that is important. So let's get into it.
Yes, let's. So most professions, whether you're a psychologist, whether you're a social worker, whether you're a psychotherapist or a counsellor, most of us would be required to, well, I think pretty much all of us would be required to complete a certain number of professional development hours per year. For psychologists in Australia, it's 30 hours per year. 10 of those hours need to be peer supervision or peer consultation. And so that leaves 20 hours of other professional development and ways that we can develop our skills. So I believe that's probably quite similar for other professions as well.
Yes, it probably is. As psychologists, we do have, this requirement to keep pretty detailed notes about the skill development and training that we undertake. And so I think that's why we want to talk about this episode, because we have that professional responsibility to be really clear and also quite planned about how we do this. But let's talk about where we can improve ourselves, like where we can get this knowledge from, because there are lots of different places, aren't there, Claire?
Oh, yes, so many ways. And so I guess, and also I think that there are different costs associated with the different ways. So, for example, we could complete a formalized training program, and the price of these could vary between thousands of dollars and hundreds of dollars. And so we could complete potentially a psychotherapy training program over the course of a year or more. Or we could complete a series of workshops. I'm thinking of something like schema therapy, which I think is level 1 is three full days, level 2 is 3 full days, and similar to EMDR.
That's right. So if you're looking online and you're seeing some courses, pop up in your ads, or you're specifically searching for courses, you'll see in Australia there are a number of different education bodies, organizations and institutes that are providing, that are approved to provide training in different therapeutic modalities, as like the ones that we've mentioned. And you will see that many of them are face-to-face, but now we are, seeing a lot of online options popping up as well, which is great for those of us who live in rural and remote areas. And yes, they often have a pretty, decent price tag attached to them. But there is a reason for that, and that's because usually that organization has gone through a big process to get approved to be able to provide certified training to professionals like us. And you can expect usually to get quite a high level of skill improvement from those courses as well.
Yes, because normally they'll include an educational component, but normally there'll be some kind of practice component with role plays. So it really involves developing some level of confidence and competence in what you're learning. And in terms of what you can count, essentially, as long as you can, as long as the therapies that you are learning would be considered evidence-based, and And I think that is a very broad term, but it will be looking to see, whether or not there is a research base for the efficacy of these therapies. And sometimes I know that the APS sometimes do provide PD points. So I guess the programs might be accredited in some ways to provide points, particularly if the APS is, say, running those programs, so you can see quite clearly how many hours you can count. But you don't need to have these programs accredited by any body, any particular organisation, in order for them to count, which I think is really important, because it really is more of a self-assessment in terms of, is that going to meet your learning and your development needs?
So you raise a really good point. So we've talked about, formalized high-level skill development training programs that you can find online. But what you're letting us know, Claire, is that the CPD activity needs to have an evidence base behind it. So if I can just give a bit of a off-the-cuff example. So if you were looking at into crystal therapies with your clients, I would, be cautious about, just checking that there's an evidence base for using that in your practice. That's just one example. Pretty well debunked. And so be mindful of the CPD that you're looking at choosing, because we want it to be evidence-based for our client base. But the other thing you raise is that I think now, with the advent of online access to online services, just like what you and I are doing here in this podcast, you can count things such as listening to podcasts or subscribing or joining up to webinars as continued professional development. But we need to use our professional discretion to determine whether we can count those or not as CPD.
Yes, absolutely. So any type of CPD that we complete is really, it's more of a self-assessment and to see whether or not it complies with your learning plan. And we have already released an episode on creating a learning plan. So if you haven't listened to that one, that might be a good one for you to go back to, because we do want all of our CPD to link back to that plan. But also we want it to link to our competency development as therapists. And so as psychologists, for example, there are a number of competencies that we need to be meeting. Those competencies are actually changing for us in December 2025. So some of us are going to be looking at those competencies and wanting to upskill in certain areas and seeing some gaps. And it really is for us to determine what is going to be appropriate for our own learning. And like you say, looking at whether or not there is a robust evidence base. So something like, therapies that promise very quick fixes that don't really have much of an evidence base could be very, very quickly seen to be, if your professional development plan is audited at any time, it could be seen to be not evidence-based. And so we want to make sure that we are really meeting those requirements. So if you're sticking to, well-known therapies such as CBT or schema therapy or EMDR or DBT, psychodynamic therapy, you're going to be pretty safe.
Yeah, that's right. And from memory, there is a list of evidence-based therapies that the APS puts out, and there will always be a version of that available on their website. And I'm pretty sure you don't have to be a member to access that. And so if you're not sure about whether a therapy is evidence-based, you could look up that. Look up the APS list of evidence-based therapies, and you'll be able to determine from there how you should proceed.
And if you are thinking about a therapy that isn't on that list, it doesn't mean that you can't necessarily train in that therapy, but it's just determining the rationale. So, for example, I'm actually completing quite a lot of training at the moment in somatic therapy, which isn't on that APS document. However, I do integrate that with EMDR, which has a very strong somatic component. So of course I'm using it in the context of an evidence-based therapy, which does exist on that list because EMDR is actually.
That's such a great example. Thank you for sharing that. I think now what we might talk about is the other ways that we can record CPD and like other ways that we can get our CPD hours through the year. Shall we talk about, you know, the availability now of online workshops and webinars that are around?
Yes, yes. I mean, there are lots and lots of, I mean, goodness, that you could find lots of free and paid online workshops. I mean, you could probably find some really good tutorials even on YouTube. Again, it's about making sure that whoever is providing the webinar is qualified and is presenting information that's of high quality.
So be discerning. Like if you want to record something in your CPD log to say that it was a part of your professional development, consider who it was that was delivering the information. Are they a professional in the mental health space? And was it rich in detail, and did it personally contribute to you learning something about that modality or that information or that area of research, and then influence how you work with your clients?
Yes, absolutely. The AAPI have a growing list of CPD webinars. Usually these are very short, so around 1 hour. And again, some of the free information that you'll find online will probably be quite introductory in nature. So if you're learning something from scratch, you're not sure about a topic and you're wanting a really basic introduction, you could probably find some really good free information. It's when you're wanting to deepen your knowledge that you're finding often that you're wanting to maybe access something that's paid because the person has spent time really consolidating information and it's more of an advanced level, or it's pitched for a particular audience to understand. You know, providing sort of very introductory workshops, for example, usually they're very thought out information.
I'm thinking about giving an example of what a learning journey might look like for someone when they're starting out and they're thinking about dipping their toe into learning some other modalities or interventions. So, for example, most of us are trained in CBT when we're becoming psychologists. It's still considered the gold standard foundational therapy for us to all understand. And I think that still has a lot of relevance in what we do even now, you know, when we become very experienced in this role. But we soon often will find that cognitive behavior therapy, sorry, let me say that again. Soon we may find that cognitive behavior therapy or CBT may not always apply very well in most situations with our clients. So you might find yourself interested in another therapy like schema therapy or EMDR. And you might dip your toe in by maybe buying a book and reading a book about one of those therapies that's someone might recommend a book to you. That will count as CPD. You need to record that in your logbook and reflect on what you've learned as a result of reading a chapter or however many chapters of that book. And then from there, you might decide that you're ready to step up into some more formal training experiences for that type of therapy. So you might find some of the brief webinars or courses that are available for free or for a small nominal cost online, which are readily available now. And from there, you might think, yes, this is starting to fit me well. I think I'm getting my head around this. And that's where you would then step up and look at paying for a more comprehensive training opportunity that might take a couple of days online or face-to-face, but it will have knowledge and a role play component. And then you're walking away with really specific practical skills that you can take into the therapy session. And then ideally from there, you might seek supervision with someone who knows how to do that type of modality. They will further support your learning and growth. And then, from there, you can then continue to to find more training in that area, because there are a lot of levels of training that we can go through in those therapies.
And what we find is, I mean, that was such a great description, Isabelle. Thank you, because it really does highlight that sort of journey into learning something new.
Mm.
And I think the other thing you're highlighting is that when we do begin to learn something new, we begin to find out that there's much, much more to learn, and there's always more to learn.
Yeah.
So even when we have completed that 3-day training, we come away with a level of knowledge that we didn't have before, but we don't necessarily come away knowing how to do this in every session and not needing any help in the future. We certainly need sort of a little bit of scaffolding around that and support around that in order to sort of build on those foundations. So I think that what you've highlighted there is a great journey in terms of learning something new. And I think it's quite easy to get caught up in a habit of accessing lots of different, very foundational or basic type of information throughout the year. It can be really good in terms of just building a breadth of knowledge about what's available. But we also want to be looking at depth of knowledge, not just the breadth. We want to be looking at deepening our understanding of at least, I think, 1 or 2 different therapeutic modalities. So I'd really be thinking about keeping that in mind when you are, particularly when you finish an internship, you've often spent a lot of money and you're either thinking, oh, now I can do these courses that cost money, or thinking, now I can save some money and not have to spend a fortune on CPD every year. But I'd be really thinking about what it is that you want to achieve and how you can actually get both a broad understanding of lots of different concepts, which can be really helpful, but also a deeper understanding and a journey that you were just describing, Isabelle, for example.
Yeah. It might take time for you to work out what is the area that you want to get a deeper understanding of. And also, I just want to reflect, in my situation, being a government employee in health, I am also strongly encouraged to participate in training that's provided through my workplace. And that can be very tempting because I'm not paying for that training. I'm also being paid for the time that I go and participate in that training. Sometimes, though, it doesn't always line up with my professional development plan. And I will just share openly that it has delayed the deeper development of my skill in the modalities that I'm truly interested in, because I've found that I will take up the opportunities because they're offered to me and my whole team's participating in them. So I feel like it's important for me to, understand the training that the entire team's going through and being encouraged to use. But then I get to, halfway through the year or end of the year and go, my brain has got no space to do more EMDR training. So I've had to really learn how to work out how to balance my professional development plans each year, and I'm starting to get better at it now. And I just want to share with everyone that you might go through that in those early years as well. If you're in a paid salaried role where you get lots of training thrown at you for free, it's wonderful, it's great, you'll get exposure to lots of things, but don't let that discourage you from still pursuing some expertise or at least some deeper skills in some of the modalities that really do help us to do our jobs effectively. Not saying that other things that we're trained in won't, but we've got to be aligned with the thing that we enjoy using, the treatment that we enjoy using. If we're not fully buying into the intervention that we've received training in, our clients can tell if we don't fully believe it or if we're not fully hooked into it. So just because you might be getting heaps of stuff from work and it does count as CBT, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's helping to enrich your learning and your skills as a therapist.
That is also such a good point, because there's so much out there that if we took advantage of absolutely everything that was out there, we'd spend our entire lives doing CPD. So we do need to be choosing what's going to align for us and where we want to spend our time, because there is energy involved, because it's not just about watching that webinar or attending that training, but it's also then about how we begin to put these skills into practice. Because we don't want to be spending our time and money on a 3-day workshop only to come away and even if someone else is paying for that, but only to come away and never use those skills.
Yeah, look, what I found has happened to me is I have really integrated parts of a lot of things into what I do. And, you know, being eclectic certainly wasn't encouraged when I was in masters. And I think we use the term integrative now as a more like strengths-based, you know, positive approach to having many different tools in our toolkits for different situations at different times. I'm certainly so grateful for some of the tools that I've picked up through the different trainings that I've taken, like participated in over the years. But I certainly recognize the value in becoming like quite good, at least like relatively good at one particular modality. And especially if we're working in like a trauma space, I think that's where we find that it's important to have like a good grounding in a really good trauma-informed therapeutic intervention.
Yes, absolutely. And so when we are to recap in terms of the types of CPD that we can complete, yes, we've got these formal trainings, whether it's live online or live in person. I'm completing an in-person training at the moment, and it's actually wonderful because after so many online trainings, I'm really enjoying that sort of that human contact and going for lunch with people and spending time in the tea break, getting to know people outside of the training that we're doing and getting to know people. It's been wonderful. So I think that, you know, these are really obvious ones, but then we've also got, you know, reading books. We've got podcast episodes, and you see, as you were saying before, that we want these to relate to our learning plan. So, for example, if you're learning about EMDR and then you listen to a podcast episode on something in particular, because I mean, you'll find podcast episodes on so many different areas, and I found some wonderful EMDR podcasts, and we can learn quite a lot from those. When we are completing any type of PD, we really do need to be keeping a record of what we've learned and a reflection and how that relates back to our learning plan. And one thing that I would always recommend as well is that you, I think this ties in with almost that sense of deliberate practice where you think about, well, how am I going to integrate this? So in the last training that I completed, I came away with some things that I wanted to actually integrate into my practice. And I just chose 1 or 2 things. And I thought, this is what I'm going to practice this time. You know, I'm going to, and so putting those things into place. So for example, if you're thinking about EMDR as an example, you might be looking at different types of cognitive interweaves and writing a list of all the different types of interweaves that you could actually be using, so that when you're in a situation, you can draw on that information. And you know,
having a plan. So like finding the things that you think could be good to integrate, but then being specific about the plan, and have that in your CPD log under the reflection. This is what I'd like to introduce. This is the plan that I have that's going to support me with introducing this skill. How am I going to evaluate whether or not I'm using it effectively? And so being really detailed and being really specific, being deliberate will help you to maximize your learning so much.
Yeah, I mean, even scripting things out or writing yourself, like sometimes writing information sheets for clients, you know, like a cheat sheet around this is what EMDR therapy is.
That's a great idea.
Or this is what schema therapy is, so that you've got that information to hand, but you've also got a resource that you can give to people. That this can really help consolidate your knowledge beyond the initial reflection. And it wouldn't necessarily count towards CPD, developing that resource, but what it does do is really consolidates the CPD so that the learning, because when we think about how much we actually learn in a workshop, it's a huge amount. We can't take it all away and implement all of it You have to be selective, and it's either about, well, what's going to be most helpful for my clients? This is what I think is what's going to be most helpful for my clients, or what am I struggling with and what do I need help with? And so that I can then focus on that.
Right. This has been really such a rich episode, and I hope it's been useful for our listeners. And remember, if this is an episode that lines up with your CPD learning plan for this year, remember to record it and count it towards your CPD hours.
As usual, if you have any questions for us, or if you like any other topics to be covered in episodes, then please contact us, and we will put it on our very, very long list of things that we want to share with you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. Hope you have a great day. I'll see you next time.
See you next time.